In our last half hour, we heard from Runaway Bride Jennifer Wilbanks. So what should you do if you're having second thoughts? Dr. Kathleen Hall tried to run away on her wedding day, but her mom got her back in time to walk down the aisle. She's still happily married to that man, and it's been 30 years later. But the stress of that day inspired her to write Alter Your Life, Overbooked, Overworked, and Overwhelmed. Rachel Saphir called off her wedding 2 weeks before the big day and has never looked back. Her book is There Goes the Bride, Making Up Your Mind, Calling It Off, and Moving On. Today, contributor and psychiatrist Gail Saltz is here with some good advice. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
That was a mouthful. Okay, let's start out with you, Kathleen. You left on the morning of your wedding, and your mother came and found you, sent out people to find you. And you came back, and it's been over 30 years.
Yes.
What happened that morning when you woke up?
What happened that morning was I was terribly in love, and I knew that I wanted to marry him, but when I woke up that morning, I just sat up in bed and said, I can't go through with this. And I think it was the whole thing about forever getting married. I was worried about my own personal power. 30 years ago, all of us women were dealing with issues of power for the first time, and I didn't know what putting that ring on my finger would mean. Would I be Mrs. Somebody? And I wanted to be myself, so I was afraid of losing my identity, so I just left. I mean, I knew I'd probably eventually marry, but I didn't think of it that time. I just said, I got to get out of here.
So you come back to your wedding day,
yes.
Your mother gives you a speech, and the question I guess everybody has on their mind when you look at this story last night with John Mason and how he continues to stand by Jennifer Wilbanks,
yes.
is what did your fiance and now husband say to you when you arrived back?
He was the one when the wedding was delayed and they were waiting, and they were playing the wedding march 7 times, and I was smoking my last cigarette in the back of the church, and he kept seeing the smoke, and some people thought it was a halo, but of course it was Marlboro 100s. I just kept watching that priest down at the altar, and I said, I just don't think I can do this. He knew. He said, even if we don't do it, then he was smiling. He had this radiant smile. He knew that it had nothing to do with my love. It was just a stress reaction. And Alexis, the positive thing that came out of that was I worked also at 104 World Trade Center. I was under incredible stress, and I realized that some of us have stress hardiness and some of us don't. So I have spent my whole life passionately studying stress, and subsequently have become an expert on stress.
Rachel, let's talk about your story.
Yes.
You felt like it wasn't right from the beginning. We talked about this earlier, even at the engagement stage. And there were periods throughout it where you planned to call it off, and then he finally did it 2 weeks beforehand.
He did
What
it.
happened?
Well, I'd just like to say the difference. Dr. Hall had cold feet, and the women that I wrote about in There Goes the Bride, and the women who come to theregoesthebride.com, and myself very often have what I call frozen footsies. And it's just this, it can be for any number of reasons, but it's more than cold feet. You shouldn't go through with it. And in my case, great guy, still a great guy, but not the guy for me.
Gail, let's talk about this, okay?
Yes.
The first thing we need to understand is, why is this happening? Is it stress? Is it the loss of your identity? What exactly is it?
What I think is happening, and I think both these stories represent, is that every bride, every person getting married, every person making a big decision feels ambivalent. They have mixed feelings, and that's normal. What's not normal and not okay is not being aware of the negative ones.
Right.
So when you stuff it down, actually, as was said last night in the interview, when you stuff it down and try to stuff it away, then you're going to blow at some point. You're going to become overwhelmed with the panic and not be able to examine whether, in fact, you want to get married. So it's the ability to examine the negative side and be aware of it that actually makes you be able to decide whether to get married.
One of the things I found really fascinating that you said earlier is this whole issue of, I didn't feel comfortable talking to anybody.
Exactly.
And you know, a lot of people say, Jennifer Wilbanks, 14 bridesmaids, there wasn't anybody to talk to.
Well, that's what I tell women. You've got to reach out and you've got to reach in. Very often you don't talk about it because you think it is cold feet and you don't want people to think poorly of you, think poorly of him. I tell women, let it out. Discuss your fears with people. You can go on theregoesthebride.com and discuss it anonymously, and also to reach in and think about what's the real answer. It does rise to the top, and people tell me after the fact, it's not that they didn't know the answer, it was that the answer was very overwhelming.
And another thing is we prepare for marathons. We prepare for the Boston Marathon and the Olympics. When you put that ring on your finger and you know the most stressful thing you're choosing to do in your life is going to happen, prepare for it. We need to do self-care. We know that people need to immediately, I think, all the families need to go into stress management. You know, they need to exercise. They need to surround themselves with loving people. And also, you can even eat to reduce your stress, which I talk about in my book. There are very clear ways you can do to reduce your stress.
You know what? Don't be afraid to seek some advice.
You really need to, it may not be able to be a family member, it may not be able to be a friend. You may need to go to a therapist to help you sort out really why you feel negatively or why you want to get married.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. We could talk about this for hours. It's a really interesting topic, but I want to thank you all for joining us. Rachel Safir, Gail Saltz, and of course Kathleen Hall.